All right. Thank you, Bob. Next up, we have John Menke talking about the binary blues, the AZ cast meets the DGS.
Well, Bob, I guess that's too loud. Okay. Bob Denny is griping because he's 76. Some of us here wish we were only 76. In any case, this is binary blues. We've already got the first error, which is that this slide is not working right. So we'll have to be flexible, as they say. Before I get started, I did want to talk a little bit about the past. It's really, really good to be back together with you folks and be stimulated and new ideas and so forth. Oh, there, that looks better. What happened? It's all digital. It's got to be deterministic, right? Anyway, down in the lower right-hand corner are three of the names that occurred to me to try to remember. These are people who are no longer with us. They're dead. The second one is Andy Odell, who was a sometime member here. He was a professional, or he was an academic. He responded to emails from amateurs. I can say that in the first person, full of ideas and energy and always willing to help and give advice. He died young a couple of years ago. Lee Snyder, remember Lee, who would tell the worst jokes possible, and nobody here has picked up on that. Bob Buckheim, he doesn't tell jokes like that. He doesn't have a sense of humor. But I miss Lee. Lee was a really good person and did interesting astronomy. The third one was not a member of this group, Steve Swayze. When I was trying to build my 18-inch f3.5 Newtonian, nobody would grind the mirror, or they wanted 10 grand or something like that. And I discovered Steve Swayze lived in Washington State, reasonable price, ran his own small business. He's the guy that ground, what was 36-inch or 40-inch or something like that, huge mirrors for people. He delivered it, it worked great. And he's in his 50s. He died a couple months ago. I just ran across that. So he's another person that we've lost. Fortunately, people like Bob Denny and so many other people who contribute, they're still with us and still working away. Okay, so everybody knows my favorite star, the only star I know where it is in the sky, is AZ Cas. And as I've been dealing with that, it's an eclipsing binary. We'll talk about it in a minute. As I was dealing with that, and my wife was listening week after week after week to me griping about a red star and a blue star, and how do you measure which is which, and how can you do measurements and separate them and learn about them. And so she did her usual Google thing and found a song, which is Binary Blues. And so she insisted, let's see if it's in here. Let's, hell, excuse me. I'm going to try and play it. I was going to have Bob play the whole file, but I didn't do that. There we go. Hopefully this will. It's a really nice tune, actually. This is all triggered by wokeness and all that stuff, but it's a great piece of music for this. Is that coming through? So this goes on for month after month as I keep working on this darn star. Anyway, that's Binary Blues. And next slide, please. Are you doing the slides? Where do I do? Oh, this thing. Shut up. There we go. Down is forward. Whoops. I guess up is backwards. And there's a picture of my wife. Okay. So here's AZ Cas. When I found it on the internet, I thought, boy, that's a really great photograph. Did that come from Hubble or what? Of course, it's a stock Google junk photograph, but it's actually pretty accurate. as far as we know, for AZ-CAS. There's a cool red star. That thing's almost as big as the orbit of Mars. And a little blue star, about a 25th or so of its diameter. And they're locked in an embrace, 9-year period, eclipsing variable. This picture is actually apparently fairly accurate in terms of scale and so forth, but nobody's laid an eye on it, so you can't say it's not true. Okay, this discussion today in 2 parts. One is characteristics of AZ-CAS and what the frustrations are that lead to the binary blues. And then the second half is the photometry and spectroscopy that I've done and am in process of doing on that star. These data are from the only paper around with any substance to it, 1977, by a woman named Ann Cowley, who's, I think, older than I am at this point. She responds to emails, very, very gracious lady. So it's a 9-year period, and we are actually in the midst of the primary eclipse. The primary eclipse being right here. Here's now. And the primary eclipse is the red star passing in front of the blue star. So those are pretty close to scale. This is a highly elliptical system, 9-year period. They're probably not tidally locked or anything, just cruising around and around. Both of them have mass in the teens. Many of these data are really not all that certain. That's part of why I'm doing my work. But that's pretty much what's going on. And I didn't mention the 2 other kickers. With one is it's 9.3 magnitude. So you guys are griping about Origai and all that stuff at what, magnitude 2 or 3 or whatever it is. Try working down at 9. And it's also low in the sky. This spring, when we have the primary eclipse, I've been working at air mass of 4 and 5, 10 degrees above the horizon in Maryland. And this is not in pristine conditions. That's all part of the challenge. So the challenge here depends on the ratio. You got the ratio of areas of about 300 to 1 between the 2. So then the issue is if you're trying to do spectroscopy and separate the blue star spectrum from the red, or at least what you can separate, then the blue star may or may not be too bright or not bright enough to show up. And we'll get into some of that. Here's a calculated spectrum. The top one shows a 3,000 degree star. That would be the red star. Here's a putative, I like that. I've used that word for years, putative. Here's a putative star of 9,000 K, which would be the blue star. And you can see that here's the visual path. At 4,000 angstroms right here, there's lots of blue spectrum there that you can get at with a spectrometer. On the other hand, if the blue star is only 6,000 versus the 3,000, then there's far less difference between the 2 down here in the blue. So you'd have great trouble finding results. Guess what? That seems to be where we are, where I am with AZ-CAS. Okay, that's the last of the theory about blues and reds. But you'll start to get a feel for what the challenges are. So first, let's talk about the photometry. It's a C11, pretty standard thing, except the wide field of view. I've got about 14 arc minutes because I wanted to get reasonable comp and reference stars. I do use interference filters, the evaporated ones, because in Maryland, several of the colors of the Cousins system just fail after a year or 2 years. They get all mucky and gray. Then all the settings change. You got to tear the system apart. So I just went and paid the money for the interference filters. I use Maxim for the camera control and for taking the images, for the image reduction, and then Excel for the analysis. This is my field. We were talking about ensembles and all that stuff. Here is AZ-CAS, and here are my various reference stars taken from the AVSO database. And I've been doing the photometry using this setup and variations of it for the last couple of years. This is the payoff for me this spring. As we chug along, this is intensity by magnitude on the left. And here's the blue star, the blue filter, I should say. And here it is at March 19th, approximately. It took a drop of a half a magnitude, and it's been level ever since. I hope you noticed that the data here go all the way out to June 1. It was cloudy last night, so I have no new data for you. That's as far as it goes. The rest of it, the other three filters, visual red and infrared, are higher up. They also show a drop, but you expect less so. Here's some of this horrible, we were talking about noise and bad data. There's tons of it back here. 2 years ago, when I set up my system, I just set it up to try and get the mechanics and so forth working. And I didn't pay any attention to things like doing decent flats and decent corrections and so on. And then I realized as I got really close to the eclipse, I got to shape up a little bit and make it better. And so at about this time here, I started putting my stars on the same pixels every night, all night long. And when I did that, suddenly these 1/10 of a magnitude variations dropped down to, I don't know, 10 or so, as a 100th of a magnitude or so variation night to night. So that's where it's going to stay. The end of the primary eclipse comes toward the end of June. That's going to be right there. So anybody wants to go out and take a look at that, please do. And send me a copy of your data if you would. Okay, so it did produce an eclipse like it was supposed to. How about the secondary eclipse? Secondary eclipse will be in about 1.5 years. This is where the red star will be behind the blue star as seen from the Earth coming up. As far as I know, that has not been observed in the past because there's just, at best, you're going to take a tiny disk and go across the star. And so there might be 0.004 magnitude. This is on a red star, which normally has variation anyway. On the other hand, it's not within 10 degrees of the ground. So there's some hope for that when that occurs. That's really a challenge to you guys to pick up on that. That'll be in February 2024. Okay, that's it for photometry for the moment. Then we switch to what's more fun, which is spectroscopy. Using the same 18-inch, I had 2 spectrometers. One of them is FS1, which is the one I built 10 years ago, and you all have heard some of the talks about that. The second one is the DGS double grating spectrometer, which is my new one. And that does have a new camera on it, a CMOS camera, which takes getting used to. And the good news is it was $2,000 and it's got a efficiency down way deep in the blue of somewhere around 60 to 80%. And it does run on ASCOM. Thank you, Bob, wherever you are, because good luck on anything else. It does have some glitches, the camera does, but overall it has worked pretty well. And did I mention the price was $2,000? And this is a bigger chip than anything else I've got anyway. The one downside for me, the pixel sizes are only 3.5 microns. And so I have to bin all the time, which is, I guess, not a problem, but it just offends me to have something like that. It's poorly matched to the rest of it. I still use Maxim for the camera control, data reduction, and Excel for the analysis. General observing plan, I take 9 5-minute images of AZ-CAS. Remember, it's magnitude 9. Incidentally, the spectrometers run at about resolution R equals 3,000, 2 to 3,000. So I do 9 images and then 1 image of a B star that's close in the sky that's 6 magnitude. And then I do one image of a red star at K2. So I'm covering red and blue. And that's magnitude 7. And that's half a degree away. So they're reasonably close in the sky. Telescope will slew okay, and so forth. And then you repeat. So preferably I get 2 hours of data. If I can get 4 hours, that's even better. But it's not terabytes, but it's still a lot. Here's the field. Here's the FS1, 10 years old spectrometer. Here's the plan. Let me spend just a minute on this. Light comes in from the right from the telescope, goes through a pellicle, which is just a thin film that reflects 10% of the light off to a CCD camera as a guider. The rest of it goes through the slit, bounces off of a diagonal, goes through a collimator lens. The parallel light hits the diffraction grating, comes back, just offset enough so it misses the mirror and comes back to the slit. I've been using this spectrometer for 10 years and it just keeps working and working and working. I tear it apart for something, put it back together, it starts working and working and working. It is all remote control, of course. I like to sleep. Let the equipment take care of itself. This is a spectrum from the FS1. This is the spectrum of AZ-CAS and the 2 other stars that I have. Red is AZ-CAS. I have a bunch of graphs you'll see, and I keep the same color tracking through it. So the red or magenta or whatever the heck that is AZ-CAS. The black is the B star, B reference star, and the green is the K cool reference star. If I expand the this is 6100 to about 6900 angstroms. If I expand the H alpha region, you see there's a general emission. That's why this star is actually classed as a BE star in some of the lists. That's how I originally started seeing it. And it obviously has an absorption feature in it that's to the blue side. This is, and here, the green, I should say, is the H alpha in the cool star. Same setup, integrated in the same time series. So this is the work that I've been doing. So when I first started, this was my first observation of AZ-CAS that showed any interest. I had been doing, this was now 2012. So here's the same spectrum, the same boring spectrum, same dip and everything. Then I had a night when I started the system going and I went to bed, came down the next morning, and clearly the system had lost lock on the tracking star on AZ-CAS and lost lock for an hour or so. And then it found the star, A star came back. And I had 2 sets of data, the red and the yellow here. And I couldn't even be sure it was the same star. Did it come back on the same star or not? So I set that aside, set aside everything, came back to it 6 years later, which makes it about, what, 5 years ago. Came back to it, now having more experience. Took 5 minutes to convince myself it locked back onto AZ-CAS, just like it was supposed to. And this is actually the same star. So these are the 2 events, 2 things that occurred within hours. So that got me hooked. So then I started a long-term series of observations of AZ-CAS, because there must be more of this, right? The first few days I did it was back at phase 6, phase 0.6. Remember the red stars up the top of the curve. And I got some unusual spectra, and then it settled down into essentially this same old standard boring star. And that's the way it's been almost without change for 3 years. So this is a case of you can't prove nothing, but you can sure prove nothing much is going on. Except there's always this, it only took 2 or 3 hours for these events. So what are your odds of catching one? Okay, there's the setup, there's a telescope, there's a spectrometer. This is all still FS1 sitting on the side. And there are the two observatories. You'd never think that my wife and I ran Home Dome Company, but there they are, two of them in the backyard. And then comes the issue of this title of the DGS. The problem is how to capture both the red and the blue. If I'm observing the thing with a spectrometer and I'm observing in the red region near H alpha, and there's an event like the one that I saw in 2012, if there's an event, the first thing you're going to wonder is what's going on in the blue section of the spectrum. But if I switch back and forth, then I'm going to miss it because it takes me a couple hours to get a decent observation. Alternatives, you can switch to, you can have more spectrometers and more telescopes and do a spread spectrum. Remember, this is 9th magnitude, so there's a problem. And finally, I decided to use what I at least call color splitting and a second grading, because gratings are cheap. And they're only a couple $100. And you might wonder, and that uses a dichroic. How many people have ever used a dichroic? Oh, you guys know a lot more than I did. I mean, I knew the word, but I never used it for, well, I know you would. Never use it for anything. The most amazing thing to me is how sharp that curve is. So on the left-hand side, this is 4,800 or so angstroms. On the left-hand side, it reflects all the blue. I mean, all the blue. And on the right-hand side, a longer wavelength than that, it passes it 100% with almost no artifacts installed. And of course, you look at the catalog, those are only $200. But wait a minute, when you start making it bigger to 2 by 3 inches, and then I start wanting the thing to be flat and some other things like that, I end up with $2,000 in that dichroic filter, which is still cheaper than another spectrometer and mount and telescope. This thing's built, this is the same optics as before. I go into, in my paper, written paper, I go into the issues here in more detail than I will here. So I still have a guiding camera, and here's the blue, so-called blue grading, here's the red grading, dichroic in between it, roughly at 45 degrees, and the collimator lens here. There are a number of challenges in building this that I didn't even think about before I started. The chief one, or one of them being, that this path length from the lens to the chip has to be equal to the slit to the lens distance. Those two have to be equal to well under 1 millimeter. And so you think, oh, I can measure that really easily, but it's not so easy. Everything has to fit in here. And my new camera, this nice CMOS camera with a huge chip, means that the chip is bigger. Everybody says that's better, but I've got a harder geometry problem because I have to feed light into that whole chip or else throw part of it away. In any case, this is the design, and it's worked great to begin with until I tried to make sure it was working right. And that has been the challenge. Here it is, it exists. And if I expand that, take the little cover off, you can see in here, there's the collimator lens, dichroic in an aluminum holder. Here's the edge of the red grating. The blue grating is up here in the little side piece. Here's the camera. This whole thing weighs 8 pounds, which my telescope and mount will carry, okay. Here's an example of the result. This is on a nice bright moonlit night. Here's the red spectrum. Remember, you can just tilt the grating a little bit to make the spectrum come out where you want on the camera. The red spectrum down here, the blue one up here, the sky background, blue sky with Fraunhofer lines from the moonlight. So it's kind of neat. So what do you do with the data? You scan the spectra. That's straight enough. And I do the spreadsheet stuff. What do I have? How many minutes? 6, 20? Oh, okay. So there's a lot of stuff on here. I'll spend just a second. There's the red side and the blue side, obviously. The 3 stars that I'm measuring each time. And so I run the data, produce the graphs. Here's the graph. You recognize that. That's the same spectrum pretty close that I've been seeing for 3 years, 4 years. And then I have a similar thing on the blue side. This is pre-eclipse, and you can see that the magenta is above the green, which is the reference K star. They've both been normalized back up here at 4,800 or so. And clearly I'm picking up spectrum from the presumed blue star. Remember, presumed, nobody's photographed it except for Google. So here's some more pre-eclipse. Here's the one on the left. At the bottom is, whoops, is the one we just looked at. And here's the blue channel over here. Again, the blue, there's blue signal in the blue side that's above what you would expect if it were only a red star there. Clearly a blue star there. Nobody's questioned that. And here's during the eclipse since the middle of March. And I'm not sure how they could have made these buttons any different, but it's still easy to mix them up. On the left-hand side, the two pictures, they're both in the red end of the spectrum over here, and you still see pretty much the same shape. And here's the blue side. This is pre-eclipse. Post-eclipse, this is during the eclipse now. During the eclipse, this has changed, and there's no longer an absorption line, not a significant one anyway. But one of the things that's interesting is here we are post-eclipse, during the eclipse, and yet we still have this feature from H alpha, which of course proves that it's coming from the red star because the blue star is hidden behind. I had arguments with people about whether this would go away or not. Well, it is still there, but it's changed. Here's more recent, May 18th and June 1. So there is a piece of absorption there, but not very much. So I'll be tracking that hopefully as we come out of eclipse. So that's again, it's up to June 1. That's as far as the data goes. We'll have to see what happens for next year. AZCast does continue to fascinate. Where's Al Harris? Is he here this year? Not here today. Remember his mantra, more data. And that's what the name of the game is. Oh, what? More data. Okay. The red-blue primary binary like this does present special challenges, and they're interesting to deal with. Technical challenge. What I call a double color spectrometry, that is 2 channels or something like that, is feasible to do. I mean, if I had another one to build, it would only take me a month or so, and I'd have it all finished. The one that I've got now, the DGS that I'm running now, I had to stop work on it. I haven't been able to refine the refinements because I didn't want to be tied up during the eclipse. And but it's working well enough to get the data. And there you are. Thank you. And I have more music if you want to hear it.
Any questions? Are there any questions online?
Okay.
All right, no
Good.
questions.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh,
Now,
gosh.
Question.
is the eclipse over or still going on?
It's still going on.
When's the 4th contact prediction?
Well, the primary eclipse will go until the middle of June. It's roughly a 100-day duration, and we've got another 3 weeks or 2 weeks. I don't try and be precise about the prediction because I'm not in the predicting game. I'm in the observing game. And then the secondary eclipse will be in a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah, Jerry.
Those of you don't know, John's been analyzing his spectra in an Excel spreadsheet ever since I've known him. And there was a lot of discussion today about software packages for, talk to John. He's got some interesting stuff there.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
Question, one of your slides showed an ATIC 839 camera.
Yeah.
What kind of a camera is that? A CC?
Okay, I'll repeat the question. The question was about one of the cameras was an 839. That's in the photometric setup. I had a SBIG 1603 and it died. And Steve Connard over here volunteered his ATIK camera, and that's what that is.
How do you wavelength calibrate your spectra from the two arms of the spectrograph?
How do I weight them?
Wavelength calibrate them to standard wavelengths.
Oh, the wavelengths. I look for lines that I can tie to as well as a neon light. In the blue, the easiest thing is the Balmer lines from the B star. They're great. They're wonderful. And then in the red, it's harder to do. So I use a neon light plus checking against some of the other lines. It's not a trivial problem, at least not for amateurs.
Question not on the AZCAS system. You said you had some problems with the 2600 camera. Would you like to give us a clue?
Well, I don't have a clue. The 2600, this is the CMOS camera that I got. And I've had to fiddle with bias and gain the same as everybody else does, with very little guidance from the book, such as it is. And I just ended up trying to use faint targets and tried to verify which mixture of settings seemed to be the best, because logic only partly works. And I had to declare victory. I'm looking forward to your report. The glitch that I've seen is that on occasion, as in every 2 weeks, I'll have an observing session when sometime during the observing session, the camera will go into a runaway mode. It'll start taking an image, or apparently take an image every second and download it, which takes 10 seconds. And so it'll keep doing that. And so I've set a limit of, say, make 45 images, each one 5 minutes long. And then I suddenly discovered that all the images got taken within 2 minutes. That's sort of a clue there's a problem. I've also seen it in the bench. It's not just this setup, with totally different power supply and computer and so forth. So there's pretty clearly a glitch in the ZWO Chinese thing. There's clearly a glitch in their SCOM driver or in the mechanics in the camera itself. I don't know if you've seen any of that. If it happened more often, I'd have to fix it immediately, but I can't send the camera back at this point. So I'm stuck.
Okay.
383, the ATIC, you mean? Yeah. Okay, sorry, that question came up. Okay,
Okay, thank you, John.
thank you.